Welcome to a driving tour through southern Adams County, Illinois, past some of the area's underground railroad sites. It is a 50-mile round trip and will take approximately an hour and a half to 2 hours depending on traffic and the number and length of stops you choose to make. Begin the tour on Quincy's Main Street at 3rd. Looking at the Mississippi towards Missouri, imagine Dr. Nelson hiding somewhere in the brush, looking at the lights of Quincy, while penning his famous hymn, The Shining Shore. He could see the Missouri mob searching for him while he hid in the brush. He was rescued by former seafaring captain, Captain John Burns, an abolitionist that you'll hear more about later. Head south out of Quincy on Highway 57 with the Mississippi River to your right. In the 1830s, a much smaller Quincy was settled high on this bluff by John Wood, who later became the governor of Illinois. The west side of 3rd Street between York and Kentucky, which is currently a motel, was once called Nelson's Court for Dr. Nelson. You will pass State Street on your left, where the home of Underground Railroad conductor John Van Doren once stood on the south side of the street. Mr. Van Doren helped more than 300 fugitive slaves escape from his sawmill on the river. Mr. Van Doren's sawmill was to the right of the bridge, where the SSBC building now stands. When he died, the community was surprised by a number of former slaves coming and placing flowers on his grave. A play titled Burnt Sugar was made about this story. After we pass the Jefferson Street stoplight, a stone bluff is on the left. High on top of the stone bluff on the left is Woodland Cemetery. There, Dr. Nelson has his final resting place, overlooking the Mississippi River and Missouri, where Nelson was run out for preaching against slavery. He is now resting on the shining shore. Probably much of the land on the riverside would have been swampland. There were no levees or dams to hold back the water. There was no bridge on which to cross the wide expanse of the Mississippi. Crossing was accomplished by boat. There are many written references of people crossing the river on ice in the winter. Back in the 1830s and 40s, this road would have been dirt, but commercial traffic in the form of horses and wagons would have traveled, particularly to the mills that used the water power to operate. Missouri, at that time, was in the process of being settled as a slave state. By 1838, Quincy was well on its way to economic boom. E.B. Kimball started a new flour mill, and several new industries were started. The city was on the move. In 1839, Quincy's population was approximately 1,600, and more than doubled to 4,400 by 1840. In 10 years, Quincy's population would be 30,000. Quincy has a strong German and New England population base. Among the settlers from New England were a group of 7 Yale Divinity School graduates who became known as the Yale Band. Included in the group were the Reverend Asa Turner and his brothers Avery and Jonathan Baldwin Turner. Based on Turner's own accounts, it would seem that Asa Turner and David Nelson were already acquainted before the Yale Band arrived. The group was solidly anti-slavery and used every means to support the abolition movement. Jonathan Baldwin Turner would later become a good friend of Abraham Lincoln. Imagine as you round the bend that you are riding a horse-drawn wagon on a dirt road. What is now 8th Street angles down off the bluff. There would be traffic along the road traveling to and from the various mills on the creeks along the river. You will pass Radio Road and the railroad tracks, then look to the right. Where the tan and red Prince Agri Products building now stands was a 160-acre plot that a group of local abolitionists owned for a period of about 10 years before letting the state of Illinois take it back. We don't know what the original plan was for that property, but it probably had to do with their anti-slavery agenda. Former Underground Railroad conductor Enoch Platt of Mendon wrote that in 1856 this event occurred along this road you are traveling. He described a middle-aged man, a woman with 2 small children, and a woman so afflicted with inflammatory rheumatism that she could neither walk nor stand. By some means they had made the acquaintance of a colored man who lived in Illinois and was familiar with the Underground Railroad. He agreed to help them cross the river if, on Sunday night, they would come to a certain point and build a fire on the river bank as a signal. After safely crossing the river, they had to decide what to do next. They first tried carrying the old woman in their arms, but this caused her great pain. Then they laid her on a blanket, and tying the corners together, they passed a stick through it. They soon found that they could not continue long. They decided to hide the sick woman. A pile of driftwood was opened, and she was placed in it. With the promise that if they escaped, they would send someone for her, they buried her under the driftwood and left her alone. The rest of the party made their way as rapidly as they could, but daylight overtook them as they were passing through a pro-slavery settlement some distance below Quincy. The guide concealed them under a small bridge in the carriage road and then hurried to the residence of one of the prominent abolitionists and reported the situation in which he had left his party. A few moments later, a messenger from the Missouri master arrived at Quincy and organized a party to hunt the runaways and, if possible, capture them. They followed the fugitives' tracks to the pile of driftwood where the woman was hidden. Here, the great number of tracks made while they were hiding attracted their attention. But, finding nothing suspicious, they again followed the trail. Conductors were sent to rescue the fugitives and whisk them north of Quincy to Deacon Jira Platt's station near Mendon. Enoch Platt said he asked the woman, "How did you feel while you were buried there alone?"
"I was some lonesome at first," she said, "but I prayed the Lord, and the blessed Jesus was with me, and then I wasn't afeard. By, I hearn somebody coming, and when I looked through the cracks, I see Massa and some more of the neighbors that I knowed, just so plain as day. Then I heard 'em talking about finding the carriage and crossing the river and following up the tracks. One of 'em stand on the logs right over my head, and when he spit, his backy juice come through the cracks of my dress. But the good Lord, he kept their eyes from looking that way, so they didn't see me. And when they was gone, didn't I bless the Lord?"
Up ahead on the left, a road is coming down the bluff. It is 24th Street. This road existed in the early days when the Underground Railroad was in operation. From here it goes into Quincy and passes where Mission Institute No. 2 once stood. It continues north past known stations by Elijah Barr and Asa and Avery Turner, and eventually to Mendon, where there would be several conductors ready to whisk them north of the Underground Railroad. Looking to the right, you can almost see the river. Beyond the tree line, the river breaks open to the head of Mill Creek. It was named that because of the 5 mills that operated at one time on Mill Creek. The town ahead was known as Millville during the 1800s, but it is now called Marblehead. Pause the CD until you reach the Brickman Lane sign. Before turning the bend, you will see a small white brick building on the left side of the road. The building marks the original spring. Folklore says that people would water their horses and get a drink at this spring before traveling on. Some stories say that the house above it was an Underground Railroad station. Although there is no evidence to suggest that the people who built it were connected with the Underground Railroad, there was a basement built into the rock that was only accessible through a secret opening hidden under the stairs. We know from journals that there was plenty of Underground Railroad activity along Mill Creek. If fugitives followed the creek to the left, they could end up about 5 miles east of Quincy at the Underground Railroad station of Dr. David Nelson and Mission Institute No. 1. We will be passing the Nelson site before the end of this trip. Missouri folklore says that Millville was referred to as Adam's Head in the songs sung by the slaves there. Head is often used to designate the beginning, as in the term Trail's Head. Perhaps Adam's Head refers to the head of the trail in Adams County. As with all history, the true meaning may remain a mystery. You will continue south on Highway 57 for 5 more miles. As you exit Marblehead, water may be visible on the right side of the road during a period of high water, something that happens in the spring. In the days before the highway was built, a dirt road ran along here with the river and the swampland to the right. You may remember in the book Uncle Tom's Cabin that the fugitive slave Eliza ran away carrying her toddler as she ran all through the night. In 1860, runaway slave Martha Tolton, with her 3 children, escaped Missouri by rowing a boat across the Mississippi. When the Civil War started, her husband ran away to fight with the Union soldiers. With him gone, the family was no longer safe in Missouri. She landed 20 miles south of Quincy near Kinderhook. Under cover of night, she carried her toddler while her boys, 7-year-old Augustus and 8-year-old Charlie, walked as fast as they could to keep up with her. They walked 20 miles along a road that was lit only by the moon's reflection on the river. When she landed on the Illinois shore, she met a group of dock workers who told her to follow this road for 20 miles. They also told her that there was a place near Quincy where the families of black regiments could be safe. Something else happened at that meeting that Martha Tolton never forgot. The men addressed her as Mrs. Tolton. Dr. Nelson's old Mission Institute east of Quincy was used during the Civil War as a place where the families would be safe. The Emancipation Proclamation exempted Missouri and Kentucky because they did not join with the rest of the southern states. Mrs. Tolton was a fugitive slave even after the war started. There, families of black regiments found security during the Civil War. Augustus would later become the first official black Catholic priest in America. Now as you drive along, imagine her running along for 20 miles during the night on this very road. The commercial activity on this road provided cover for the Underground Railroad. The clandestine actions were carried on by females as well as men. One student at Mission Institute and Underground Railroad conductor, N.A. Hunt, wrote that 2 young ladies of his acquaintance told their father that they would go to the mill with a grist, as the milling must be done. Their father was needed at home with workmen who were building a barn. While at the mill, they saw a black man at a distance and went to him. He needed help. They got him into their Dearborn wagon and hid him among the bags. When they got near their home, they didn't want the workmen to see him, so they had him crawl, and at the house they carried him in as they did the other sacks of meal. He was stored away in the garret until it was safe to be taken to the next station. Pause the CD until you pass under the highway overpass. You will go under an overpass before turning left at Payson Road away from the river. To the right of the Blacktop Road is Fall Creek. Fugitives who found themselves working their way from the river by way of Fall Creek would find a beautiful sight as they traveled beneath the Fall Creek Gorge ahead. Fall Creek itself meanders around toward Payson to the northeast. A glimpse of the gorge is visible over the bridge as you pass.
Pause the CD until after you go over the bridge.
Follow the Blacktop Road for a little more than a mile as it heads east. The road turns north where the old Fall Creek Cemetery is visible. Drive another mile and a half and put on your left-hand turn signal.
It will be 2.5 miles before you turn off this road. Ahead, you will be driving a loop around and through the town of Payson. One of the most interesting things about Payson may be how it came to be settled. Albigans Scarborough arrived in Quincy from Connecticut in 1833 looking for a place to settle. Known abolitionists and Underground Railroad operators Asa Turner, John Burns, and Dr. Eels showed him property as far away as Rushville and Lewiston, near Peoria. He spent the night in the home of John Chittenden, who was known to be connected with the Underground Railroad in Mendon, north of Quincy. The following day, John Wood took him to the property that would become Payson. Famous Underground Railroad conductor Dr. Eels urged Scarborough to settle in Illinois. Scarborough returned with his family a year later and platted out Payson. He attempted to restrict the sale of the lots to New Englanders. This caused accusations of discrimination, and eventually a compromise was reached. Scarborough managed to reserve the lots around the park for New Englanders. But what if it wasn't discrimination, as much as a desire to keep potential clandestine activities a secret? Another man who came to Payson along with the Scarborough family was Joseph Fielding. This tour will take you by the property where the Joseph Fielding house stood until it was recently demolished. The house was believed to have been an Underground Railroad station and had a hiding place in it. Pause the CD until just before the road curves to the right.
Watch ahead. Where the pavement turns right, you will want to go straight on the gravel road East 1300th Street. On the left are 3 old homes hidden in the trees. The center greenhouse was built in 1836 by Martin Seymour, who moved to Payson from Hartford, Connecticut, to join in the Underground Railroad movement. His granddaughter, Ellen Green, would later marry Eugene Nelson, youngest son of Dr. David Nelson. Please be respectful that the homes on the tour are private homes, so only view them from the road.
Turn east on North 400th Avenue. Pause the CD until you reach the stop sign. A beautiful mansion is on your left. It belongs to the Scarborough descendants. The original mansion burned down, and this one was built following the original plans. Rejoin the main road. The land on the right was the property of another anti-slavery advocate, David Prince. 2 small homes on your right, one of which is still standing, were on the property in the years before the Civil War. Mr. Prince was also one of the investors in the Payson Windmill. During the same time in history that Payson was involved in the Underground Railroad, another historical event in history affected Payson. The Mormons were driven out of Missouri back across the Mississippi River to Illinois. Some Mormon families lived and started businesses in Payson for a few years before the city of Nauvoo was constructed, approximately 40 miles north of Quincy. Albigans Scarborough was among the Paysonites who employed Mormons to work on the construction of the church parsonage. Prepare to make a left turn just after the yellow sign. At the crossroads before the stop sign, turn left on North Public Street and continue straight after the stop. In 1836, construction began on the very tall windmill on this side of Payson.
The height of the superstructure was 42 feet, and the wings of the mill were each 30 feet, making the total diameter of the wheel 60 feet. Unfortunately, it was not a financial success and did not survive but a few years. During the time it was in business, former seafaring captain and abolitionist John Burns must have hoped that runaways would know they were headed the right direction if they traveled toward it. Keep your eye out for the sharp right turn on Fulton Street, heading back toward Payson. Turn right, and you will be heading south into Payson on what would have been the old road into town. Pause the CD until you are on Fulton Street. The land ahead where the windmill stood was believed to be the highest point in Adams County. You will pass a house on the left at 800 Fulton Street that was built by Abraham Lincoln's friend and biographer, Jesse Fell. Mr. Fell came here from Bloomington and started an orchard called Fruit Hill. He served on the village board of Payson. In the 1850s, he moved back to Bloomington. The house has a hiding place in the upstairs. Since it was not a good idea to sell a house that served as a station of the Underground Railroad to just anyone, Fell sold the house to George Hunter, son of Moses Hunter, who presided over the Second Mission Institute in Quincy. Moses Hunter was said to have dressed in a long, seamless robe in the imitation of Christ. Actually, he led a very frugal lifestyle and made his own clothes in a most unskilled way. George Hunter was mentioned in diaries as one of the conductors transporting fugitives to Mendon in the 1840s. As you slowly make your way south on Fulton Street, you will approach the site of the Payson Windmill. Old maps show the mill opposite the end of Mill Street on the west side of Fulton. Turn left on Mill. Pause the CD until you are at Mill Street. Turn left on Mill. As you drive east on Mill, you will notice in front of you the incredible view for miles ahead. At the stop sign, you will see the region that we will be traveling through. This is the countryside that the fugitives traveled to find the next stations. Turn right on Main Street. Payson was first called Paysonville after Dr. Edward Payson. A noted congregational minister from Portland, Maine, Dr. Payson had no other connection to this town. After the stop sign, Payson Park will be on your left. As you pass the park, you can see the beautiful white Congregational Church parsonage on the corner. It was rumored to be part of the Underground Railroad, but extensive indoor remodeling in the late 1800s has left it impossible to know if there was a hiding place. Cross the highway to continue on Main Street. A restaurant is on the corner if you would like to stop for some refreshments and take up the tour from here. Across the park to the east is the Congregational Church. The original church had a school in the basement. The teacher lived and taught in the church that burned down in 1842. Soon, another church was built. As you continue south on Main Street past the four-way stop, know that you are on a road that eventually finds its way to the river. Continue until you turn right on a gravel road, South Street. Settlers from southern and southeastern states were called suckers, and the New Englanders were called Yankees in Payson. There was significant animosity between the two groups who settled Payson. It would be interesting to know how Scarborough, a New Englander, responded to David Nelson, who was originally from East Tennessee. Did Scarborough know that the abolition movement began in East Tennessee? Continue south on Main and turn right onto South Road. Pause the CD until you are on South Street.
Until a few short years ago, a 10-room log house stood on the left of this road. It was built by one of Payson's earliest settlers, abolitionist Joseph Fielding, who operated a silkworm farm here. An upstairs room had a false wall, behind which there was enough room for a person to hide. Drive past the first road on the right. On that road, you passed a house that Mr. Prince owned during the time of the Underground Railroad. It was moved about 2 blocks north on Washington Street in the early 1900s. Who knows if a fugitive slave was given refuge in that home? It is still a lovely residence today. The entire section of property now on your right was owned by Daniel Robbins, who was known to be involved in anti-slavery activity. Beyond the Robbins property was the property of David Prince, another anti-slavery advocate and possible Underground Railroad conductor. The Robbins and Prince families were very close. Eventually, Anna Prince would marry Daniel Robbins. Turn right on 1360 East. The property on the left belonged to Daniel Robbins. The house that will be coming up on the right was called Robbins' Nest. 2 of Robbins' sons fought in the Civil War, and letters from them remain with descendants. The Robbins' Nest is a visible Payson landmark today. Hidden in the trees up ahead on the left is a rare double house. 2 identical houses, one behind the other, is a family home even today. David Prince owned the property and the house on the left. He was known to be active in anti-slavery activities. The house was suspected to be a station, but it has been so completely remodeled that any possible hiding place no longer exists. At the stop sign, turn right or east and pass through Payson, again heading east. The only gas station on the route is on your left in Payson. It may surprise the traveler to find out that a popular crop grown around the Payson area in the 1800s was tobacco. During the Civil War, a few tobacco factories were started in Quincy. It was in one such factory that escaped slave Martha Tolton found work, along with her sons Charlie and Augustus. The owner of that factory was Philo Thompson, a founder of Payson. The Philo Thompson home still stands at the north end of Franklin Street. Pause the CD until you are out of Payson. After exiting Payson on Highway 96, put your left turn signal on. Stay left, straight east, onto North 400th Street. It is a partially blind curve. The next turn will be in about 2 miles.
My days are gliding swiftly by, and I, a pilgrim stranger, would not detain them as they fly, those hours of toil and danger. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore, we may almost discover. Should coming days be cold and dark, we need not cease our singing. That perfect rest not can molest, where golden harps are ringing. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, shore, we may almost discover. Let sorrow's rudest tempest blow, each cord on earth to sever. Our King says, come, and there's our home, forever, oh, forever. For, oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore, we may almost discover.
In the time before the 1842 Congregational Church fire, there was a school in the basement of the church. The teacher lived and taught there. A known Underground Railroad operator, Mr. Brackett Pottle, provided property for the teacher to build a house on the road ahead. Folklore has it that the house was referred to as a halfway house on the Underground Railroad. If the fugitive couldn't make it all the way to Pottle's, they knew they would be safe at the teacher's house. There is no known hiding place in the house. The halfway house is the second white house on the left or north side of the road, next to the building with the blue roof. Pause the CD until you reach the four-way stop sign. At the four-way stop sign, turn right onto 1700th Street. On the left or east, behind the barn, sits what is left of a dilapidated mansion, once the home and Underground Railroad station of Brackett Pottle. Please do not enter the drive. It is private property, and it is not safe near the deteriorating old home. The Pottle house had a beautiful open staircase that had a turn in it about 3/4 of the way up to an open landing. A trapdoor in the floor used the space the stairs created to provide a hiding place behind the stairs. The risers of the stairs were made of etched glass. From behind the risers, someone could see out, but not be seen in the darkness behind the stairs. Brackett Pottle was a founder of the Congregational Church and an active participant in the Underground Railroad movement in this area. From the dormers at the top of the house, one could see all the way to Payson. Imagine the sight of the windmill from here. You will continue south toward the town of Plainville, which was originally known as Stone's Prairie, after the original settler, Samuel Stone, who came in 1822. Samuel sent his son Abraham to school at Dr. Nelson's Mission Institute. Students of Mission Institute were decidedly anti-slavery and often helped with the Underground Railroad. Abraham later married Mary Ann Lippincott in 1841, during this area's most active Underground Railroad activity. The Lippincott family was from Madison County, near Alton, and were known to be staunchly anti-slavery and suspected to be involved with the Underground Railroad. Abraham Stone was a friend of Governor John Wood and President Abraham Lincoln. Just as you enter town, you will see the new Stone's Prairie Market on your left. We suggest you turn in the parking lot to turn around to retrace your path. On the other hand, you may want to pause the CD and visit this market, which is part of a working homestead. Turn right as you exit the Stone's Prairie Market parking lot and continue north past the Pottle House again. Stone's Prairie is most noted for the Stone's Prairie Riot. On August 25, 1860, a Republican-organized rally was planned. Abraham Lincoln was running for president. Reports indicate 7,000 to 10,000 persons were in attendance. At first, Democratic supporters planned to speak, but the invitation to the Democratic speakers was withdrawn just days before the event. The boisterous Democrats stood behind the speakers and chanted, disrupting the Republican speakers. First, heated words were exchanged, and then hundreds of rally participants broke into a fist fight. Both sides claimed the other side eventually retreated. A group from Quincy passed through Payson on the way home. There, a very unflattering effigy of Lincoln was erected on a 140-foot pole. It depicted him astride a horse with a maul in his hand and wearing pants too short for boots. 100 Payson men guarded the pole. As the group was heading out of town, shots rang out. One Republican was hit twice in the arm and received medical attention in Quincy. If you look to the left toward Payson, you will notice the view that the Pottles had. The water tower is approximately where the windmill stood. At the four-way stop sign, you will continue north for a couple of miles. Imagine, as you drive this road, what it would have been like for the fugitives to follow the creek or the Underground Railroad operator driving a buggy over this dirt road in the night to the next safe station. Pause the CD until you reach North 703rd Lane on your right, approximately 3 miles from the four-way stop sign. Turn right on North 703rd Lane. During the 1830s, you would have seen a large red barn on the left ahead. Dr. Nelson instructed his students to take the fugitives 17 miles east to the large red barn. Not all barns were painted red then due to the expensive paint. The original log cabin still exists as the kitchen on the early 20th century home. In the 1950s, the farmer who owned the farm wanted to modernize the barn and took the top story off and painted it white to use it as a dairy barn. Inside, all the original logs remain. Josiah Reed operated this Underground Railroad station. He is buried in the Adams Cemetery. Continue past this house and turn around at East 1800th Street. As you retrace your drive past Reed's barn again, the old wood is visible in the barn. Pause your CD now and restart it when you return to the stop sign at East 1700th Street. At the stop sign, cross East 1700th Street, heading west into the village of Adams, which was called Newtown at the time of the Underground Railroad. Pause the CD until the road in town turns north. In town, follow the pavement as it winds to the right and passes the old cemetery north of town. Josiah Reed is buried in Newtown Cemetery. Be prepared to make the first left-hand turn. As you round the bend past the cemetery, on the land facing you, once stood the home of George Terrell. The Terrell family was known to be involved in the Underground Railroad, and teenager Mary Terrell rode along in the buggy to make it appear as if it were just a young couple out on a romantic ride, even though a runaway slave was hiding beneath the seat. Turn left on East 1600th Street. At North 335th Street, pause to look off to the right. At the tree line far to your right was an active Underground Railroad station that was operated by a woman known as Aunt Mary Pullman. The house still exists, but the road to get there is rough. Where it crosses the creek, you would drive over a low water crossing. The house had a trapdoor in the kitchen that dropped into a tunnel that led to the barn. Turn left on North 735th and right on 1620 at Adams Trading Post, retracing your path back to East 1700th Street. Pause the CD until you reach East 1700th Street. Turn left at the stop sign and head north on East 1700th Street. You will drive past 800 North and continue until you turn left at 900 North. Appreciate how the creeks and the landscape would have been in those days. Were there other people along this route who were willing to help these fugitives? How did they walk through this rough terrain? Pause the CD until you reach 900 North. Turn left on 900 North. As you follow this road, take this opportunity to enjoy the scenery. This is land that fugitives traveled, sometimes on foot and sometimes in carriages. It will be several miles before we identify another Underground Railroad station. As you drive, enjoy the music of Dr. David Nelson's hymn, The Shining Shore.
My days are gliding swiftly by, and I, a pilgrim stranger, would not detain them as they fly, those hours of toil and danger. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore we may almost discover. Should coming days be cold and dark, we need not cease our singing. That perfect rest naught can molest, where golden harps are ringing. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore we may almost discover. Let sorrow's rudest tempest blow, each cord on earth to sever. Our King says, come, and there's our home forever, oh forever. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore we may almost discover.
Pause the CD until you reach Burton Cemetery. You will see Burton Cemetery on your left before you enter the village of Burton. Folklore has it that a former slave is buried in this cemetery. As you continue through this small village, you may wonder, as we do, if any of these old homes has a secret from the past. As you continue on State Street, you will be coming to the site of the most active anti-slavery activities, the home of Dr. David Nelson. Dr. David Nelson was born in 1793 in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Both of his parents taught at Washington College, formerly called Doak College, after Samuel Doak, one of the country's early influential abolitionists. After graduating from Washington College, David Nelson studied medicine under Dr. Ephraim McDowell, the first to perform abdominal surgery. Dr. Nelson served as a surgeon in Canada in the fight against Great Britain and in Alabama with Andrew Jackson and Davy Crockett in the Indian Wars. When Nelson returned from the wars, he started a lucrative medical practice. He fell in love with Amanda Dedrick, who is said to have influenced his anti-slavery beliefs. In the early years of their marriage, Nelson became a Presbyterian minister and taught at Center College in Danville, Kentucky. He was very active on the circuit, preaching at religious camp revivals. In May of 1836, a brawl broke out at a camp meeting while Dr. Nelson was preaching. Although he wasn't the cause of the brawl, a Missouri mob of pro-slavery forces decided they were going after him. He escaped to the bank of the Mississippi and hid in the brush for a couple of days while waiting to be rescued by Captain John Burns of Quincy. While waiting in the brush, he saw the mob searching for him, but the skills he learned in the military helped him hide. It was during this time that he penned the famous hymn, The Shining Shore. The hymn continues to be famous even today.
Pause the CD until you are on a bridge. Just past this section of North Mill Creek on your right was once a commercial center known as Hitch Switch. The rock house built on the base of the bluff was not part of the Underground Railroad, but has been a landmark on this site since shortly after the Civil War. At that time, Alexander Hunsinger owned this land. Hunsinger was a miller. He had a large flour mill and a sawmill called Havana Mills. There were brick and lime kilns. The house and a 2-story general store were made of rock. In addition to the general store, built in 1864, there was a saloon, a distillery, and even a tailor shop. A number of tenant cabins stood to the east of the house. On the second floor of the store was a dance hall that was very popular during the Roaring Twenties and was still in use in 1937. Locals called it Rock Hall. Imagine the hall lit by lanterns, with buggies and early model cars parked around it, and the sound of local musicians playing their instruments. The building was struck by lightning, damaging the roof and outdoor stairway in 1938. By 1939, the new landowner, Mr. Dietrich, tore down the buildings, crushed the rock for lime, and spread it over his fields. The descendants of the Dietrich family continue to live in the remaining structure all these years later. Pause the CD until you reach Rim Road. After 63rd Street, you will be crossing Little Mill Creek, a branch of Mill Creek that we crossed at Marblehead. By following the creek, you would wind up here. After the creek, continue up the hill and look to your right. You will see Dr. Nelson's Oakland. The house was built in 1836. During breaks, Dr. Nelson would rest under the shade of 4 oak trees and pen his famous book, The Cause and Cure of Infidelity. His book sold over 100,000 copies in the first year. After the overpass, there is a place to pull over on your right at 57th Street. From here, you can view the Nelson home and landscape, behind which Mission Institute No. 1 once stood. Pause the CD until you are stopped there.
In the living room of Nelson's home is a hiding place around the fireplace. It is entered through a trapdoor in the floor of the bedroom upstairs. The old gray house on the right after the overpass was built in the 1860s by Amanda Nelson. Members of the Nelson family lived in these two homes for many years after the war. A grist mill was operated by the Nelsons on the creek, between the two houses where the highway now runs. Behind Nelson's home, he built Mission Institute No. 1. It was a manual labor college like the one he left in Missouri. A large class building, a chapel, and 20 cabins made up the buildings there. Mission Institute prepared adults for missions in foreign lands, so foreign languages, including Greek, were taught. After Nelson died in 1844, the college lost its popularity. In widowhood, Amanda Nelson continued to run the working farm. She was particularly good at botany, and at one time had a fine fruit orchard there. During the Civil War, Mission Institute was used as a refuge for families of the Black Regiment. The large building was used as a hospital for the wounded Black Regiment. It is there that Martha Tolton would have found refuge in her escape from Missouri after her husband escaped to sign up for the Union forces. Return to driving on State Street. You will not turn again until you reach 4th Street. Although State Street is very populated today, this land was underdeveloped when the Nelsons lived and helped fugitives over this land in the 1830s and the 1840s. You will pass a stop sign at 54th Street and a four-way stop sign at 48th Street. Pause the CD until you get to the stop light at 36th and State. After the next stoplight at 36th Street was an Underground Railroad station south of State Street. It was operated by Deacon Ballard and his wife. Stories about Mother Ballard and the Ballard daughters helping in the Underground Railroad are well documented. A trap door was in the kitchen in the home. Once, when Missouri slave catchers came demanding slaves, a noise from a hiding slave's baby was heard. Mrs. Ballard dropped her good china on the floor and wailed and moaned over the loss of her best china, all the while declaring she had no hidden slaves in her house. The guys apparently worked, as the slave catchers left without discovering the hidden slaves. About 5 blocks past the intersection, there is a large brick home on the left built by the descendants of the Ballards. Continue on State past 24th Street and 18th Street. As you proceed on State Street, enjoy the following poem written by Charles Brandt of Columbus, Illinois, who lived all of his life in an Underground Railroad station there. The poem is titled My Home. It is just an old house, so some people say. It is just an old house, slowly wasting away, standing there so lonely, so silent and so grim, like the echo of an amen at the close of a hymn. The memories that linger as the melody dies bring a throb to my heart and tears to my eyes. It is the home of my childhood, the place of my birth, more precious to me than any other place on earth. If this old house could but talk, what stories it could tell of the guests entertained at this old country hotel. Some were men of distinction and of political fame. Some were great statesmen of worldwide acclaim. I wish that I could tell you the stories I've been told about the place I call home. It is so venerable and old. I have seen it sparkle with life, with love, laughter, and joy. Oh yes, I have seen this, my friend, when I was just a boy. Father Time has taken its toll from the old house, indeed, but it is still a standing firm, and I have a pleasant memory. To me, it is the nearest thing to Eden under heaven's vaulted dome. It may not look like much to you. To me, it is home, sweet home. Just before 12th Street, you will see on the right the mansion of John Wood, founder of Quincy and former governor of Illinois. John Wood came to Dr. Nelson's defense many times when the mobs came after the doctor. Pause the CD until you reach 4th Street. Turn right on 4th Street to return to the Gardner Museum where you started your tour. As you approach the museum, you may notice to the right on Jersey Street the beautiful mansion on the north side of the street. That was the home of Underground Railroad conductor Dr. Richard Eels. The home is currently a museum open to the public. You are encouraged to tour that museum for more information on the Underground Railroad in Quincy. We hope you enjoyed this tour of the Underground Railroad stations in southern Adams County, Illinois.
Should coming days be cold and dark, we need not cease our singing. That perfect rest not can molest, where golden harps are ringing. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing.